worsening pandemic, soaring inflation, intensifying food and energy insecurity. How will the G20 Bali Summit lead the world through the uncertainties? With its vibrant economy and ever-growing connectivity, how will Asia promote free trade and globalization? And as China has eliminated absolute poverty and pushes towards modernization, what will it provide to the global economy?
Leaders of the world's largest economies have agreed to work together to deal with some of the crises after their meetings at the G20 Summit held in Bali, despite their differences on certain issues. The expectation has been high that the summit will be able to bring the skyrocketing inflation under control, provide relief to food shortages, and many other problems with the spirit of cooperation. At the G20 Bali Summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping said, "I always believe that the G20 should stay committed to its founding purpose of unity and cooperation, carry forward the spirit of solidarity, and uphold the principle of consensus." Sugarcane and lemongrass grow in dense clumps. This Indonesian proverb well captures the value of solidarity. Division and confrontation serve no one's interest. Only solidarity and common development is the right choice to make. In 1999, 2 years after the Asian financial crisis, world leaders agreed then that a broad platform involving major economies across the globe should be created to address global economic challenges. And that was how the G20, 19 advanced and emerging economies, and the European Union was born. The multilateral forum proved to be a success, especially when dealing with the 2008 global financial crisis.
When the G20 was created as a parallel organization, it stayed for a long time at the finance ministers level. I was very sure, and as were a number of us, that it would take a crisis to bring it to the leaders level, and that's exactly what happened. When the 2008 crisis, and I congratulate George Bush for it, he said, okay, let's bring it up to the leaders level. That London summit prevented protectionism from taking over. And as long as we recognize that the purpose of the G20 is to make globalization work for everybody, then what in fact it's going to do is to say that each meeting has got to pick up on what happened before. The second thing that is required is that we recognize the power that occurs when leaders or ministers meet alone in a closed room.
For this year's G20 Summit, the task is especially challenging. The COVID pandemic lingers on, energy shortages and food insecurity continue, and the U.S. interest rates increase creates additional pressure on the developing world. Adding to that is the ongoing Ukraine crisis and intensifying U.S. competition with China. The International Monetary Fund predicts global growth next year will be just 2.7%, the slowest pace in more than 2 decades. For the developing world, the crisis is physical and palpable. Life in the African country of Chad is particularly hard. Severe droughts have exacerbated the ongoing food shortage, which was partly caused by disruptions in the supply chain, leaving the Central African country one of the poorest and the hungriest in the world. 42% of the population now live below the poverty line.
Happy eyes but hungry mouths. Several dozen children live in this family compound, but recently there's food for just one daily meal. A morning morsel of fried bread dipped in sweet green tea, eaten at speed. Yusuf Ibrahim Abdurrahman is father to 9 here and grandfather to several more. God will decide his family's fate, he insists, but Yusuf does what he can to stave off their hunger.
If you earn a living day by day, you eat whatever you get. Sometimes you don't get anything to eat for a day. Sometimes you are able to buy food for the whole day. Sometimes for half a day. That is how it goes.
Basically, what has happened is, after the 2008 financial crisis, growth had slowed down. So poverty reduction had slowed down. And then you had the pandemic, which was a big shock, leading to the increase in the number of people entering extreme poverty to 70 million. There has also been increased inequality between countries because the more developed and higher middle income countries were able to rebound faster with higher fiscal stimulus, the ability to vaccinate, and come back more quickly. And the lower income countries could not have that rebound.
The World Bank says more than 70 million people were forced into extreme poverty in 2020, and 790 million are now living under the poverty line. Sub-Saharan Africa is experiencing the worst, where 24 out of 28 countries are on the low-income list, including Chad. The low-income countries are not the only one to feel the squeeze. From Africa to Asia, from Europe to the Americas, the prices of essential commodities continue to rise, creating a cost of living crisis. Here are some of the inflation figures for October. Last month, the IMF increased its forecast for global inflation this year from 7.4% to 8.8%.
The immediate situation is very dire. You've got slow growth, you've got high inflation, high interest rates, tightening financial conditions, capital outflows, depreciation. This is the situation faced by many countries, including the developing countries.
This partly explains why this year's G20 Summit is vital for the world. Together, the nations of the G20 account for around 80% of global economic output, nearly 75% of global exports, and about 60% of the world's population. The scale of G20 means any possible consensus reached would mean a lot for the world. Just as the case in 2008 and 2009, when G20 nations agreed to spending measures worth $4 trillion to revive their economies, they rescued the global financial system, in some experts' words, in free fall.
When I'm asked about what is the ultimate justification for the G20, it is to make globalization work. Now, there are those, it's increasing, we're seeing where people are saying, well, globalization can't work. We're against globalization. Well, let me tell you something. Globalization is not a government choice. It is a fact of life. As you see jobs disappearing because of artificial intelligence, that's happening. And it's not a government choice, and governments around the world have to deal with it. Climate change is about globalization. And no single country, no matter how powerful, is going to be able to deal with climate change alone. And if there is one other instance in which I would make this point, it is in the support of the great multilateral institutions. You can understand that we as human beings have got to recognize that the borders that divide us have got to be overcome when people need help. And that's what the G20 is all about.
Lingering pandemic, soaring inflation, intensifying food and energy insecurity. How will the G20 Bali Summit lead the world through the uncertainties? With its vibrant economy and ever-growing connectivity, how will Asia promote free trade and globalization? And as China has eliminated absolute poverty and pushes towards modernization, what will it provide to the global economy?
Global problems require global solutions. As Indonesia is the host of this year's G20 Summit, the world is looking at Asia for inspiration for development and stability. As the international community struggles for solutions on multiple fronts, attention has been shifting to Southeast Asia and major international and regional summits. The ASEAN Summit for Southeast Asian nations, the G20 for the world's largest economies, and APEC meetings for member economies in Asia-Pacific region. ASEAN countries, including Cambodia, Indonesia, and Thailand, are hosting these meetings to help defuse disputes and recover the global economy. In Asian culture, there is a different way of dealing with problems. Throughout past crises and challenges, this region has maintained overall peace and stability across decades and has shown continued and stable momentum in development. Asian economies such as Japan, South Korea, ASEAN countries, China, and India have been growing fast, even becoming an engine of global growth. Today, Asia comprises 45% of the global economy and is projected to exceed 50% of global output by 2030. So how does Asia do it? Playing a major role is Asian culture itself, which values patience, openness, and respect for diversity in safeguarding peace and stability. This leads to stable and steady development. Former Singaporean ambassador to the United Nations, Kishore Mahbani, once explained that ASEAN has been remarkably successful at keeping peace in the once famously unstable region by following a very slow process of consultation and consensus.
The reason why ASEAN has outperformed virtually every other regional organization in the world, leaving aside the European Union, is because the Indonesians injected these ideas of musyawara and mufakat, consultation and consensus. And that's a very important thing. So it's a very slow process. You just keep talking. You keep talking. Okay, you may not agree. Let's wait. Let's take our time. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to reach agreement each time or to arrive at a decision each time. But what happens is that in the process of talking and talking, you begin to understand each other better, each other's concerns.
We are the most affected by big power competition. Therefore, in our experience, during the last 40 to 50 years, we have come to our own, the Asian way of resolving these challenges. We have decided that our common experience of being dominated, of being enslaved, of being exploited, forces us now to strive to create a peaceful environment, an environment of friendship.
Asian countries cherish peace and stability, which they see as prerequisites for growth and prosperity. But that view is being challenged by Washington's intensifying competition with and containment of Beijing, which is putting pressure on Asian countries to take sides.
So the conditions have changed. Does the policy still worth trying? It is. And I think that avoiding this Cold War mentality of a great schism is the key. Can we succeed? Well, it depends, I think, how we approach it.
President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden have met on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Bali. Many see the very fact they are meeting as a positive step forward in stabilizing the world's most important relationship. After all, the Asian way calls for communication, engagement, and understanding. Xi Jinping pointed out that the world is at a major inflection point in history, and countries need to both tackle unprecedented challenges and seize unprecedented opportunities. This is a larger context in which the two sides should view and handle China-US relations. China-US relations should not be a zero-sum game where one side outcompetes or thrives at the expense of the other. The successes of China and the United States are opportunities, not challenges for each other. The world is big enough for the two countries to develop themselves and prosper together. The two sides should form a correct perception of each other's domestic and foreign policies and strategic intentions, noting that China-US interactions should be defined by dialogue and win-win cooperation, not confrontation and zero-sum competition. Joe Biden said that China and the United States share responsibilities to show that the two countries can manage their differences, prevent competition from becoming anything near conflict, and find ways to work together on urgent global issues that require mutual cooperation. As a matter of fact, Beijing has been consistent in calling for China and the U.S. to work together for both the sake of their own interests and also for the rest of the world, instead of seeking to decouple or create a divided world.
Lingering pandemic, soaring inflation, intensifying food and energy insecurity. How will the G20 Bali Summit lead the world through the uncertainties? With its vibrant economy and ever-growing connectivity, how will Asia promote free trade and globalization? And as China has eliminated absolute poverty and pushes towards modernization, what will it provide to the global economy?
The rise of China over the past more than 40 years has seen no wars and no conflicts, but only peace. And in the recent report at the National Congress of the Communist Party of China, Beijing again emphasized China's peaceful path of growth.
The Chinese has achieved its own industrialization and modernization without ever fighting a war against its neighbor and has never occupied a single country. So I think this truly makes the Chinese experience very different from many Western countries. So that's why I think, when China says we are committed to a peaceful development trajectory, many people question. I think, you can never stop people from questioning you, but I think, you can prove with your own words and the deeds that China is indeed upholding these principles.
Something can be learned from this Asian way of respecting differences and engaging in consultation and consensus, patience, engagement, and learning to understand the needs of others. This is what is needed today.
This is the time that Asia needs to come to the front and provide solutions and take the lead. Because look at different continents, the world is quite a big mess now. So Asia, we still have peace and stability and a vibrant economy. So we have the responsibility to provide solution to the world, to lead the world economy and security to a new level. So I think this is a time and the moment for Asia to demonstrate its leadership role.
As an influential power in Asia and throughout the world, China has clearly shown it is committed to pursuing high-quality economic development, supporting globalization and multilateralism, and promoting deeper and wider opening up to contribute to global economic revival. But this is not the message displayed by Western media. On the contrary, there has been animosity and misinformation portraying China as actually moving in the opposite direction. China's growth model is close to its limits. China's economy is in deep trouble. Friendshoring is the new trend. China returns to planned economy. Statements like these have become more and more frequent recently. Facing such voices of doubt and judgment, some of which may contain genuine concern while others are deliberate slander, China has responded with patience, firm reassurance, and concrete actions. Since 1978, when China's reform and opening up began, the country's GDP has increased by 33.5 times, growth has averaged over 9% a year, and more than 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty. However, no economy can sustain such growth forever, and China is no exception. The country has entered a new stage of growth in which it is not the level of GDP growth that matters, but rather the way in which that growth is achieved.
Over the past 40 years, China has made enormous progress. It's already been mentioned that 800 million Chinese have been lifted from poverty. That has never been done before. The connectivity that China has today with 1.6 billion mobile phones, with 40,000 kilometers of bullet trains, with all the progress that we have seen on so many fronts in manufacturing, in exporting, and so on. That is very important. That said, this also seems to me significant to underscore that China now has to change gears. The expression has been used about dual circulation, in the sense that China should now depend less on exports and on foreign investment and more on internal consumption. China's investment rate has been very high, 40-45%. No other country has that rate of investment. But it must move now towards a more consumer-led economy. And that, it seems to me, is the big challenge ahead. If China manages to do that, it seems to me it will be able to reach those goals it has set for itself for 2035 and for 2049.
Speaking at the G20 Summit, President Xi Jinping reiterated China's continued commitment to opening up to the outside world. He said, China will stay committed to the path of peaceful development, stay committed to deepening reform and opening up, and stay committed to promoting national rejuvenation on all fronts through a Chinese path to modernization. China marching toward modernization will bring more opportunities to the world, inject a stronger momentum for international cooperation, and make a greater contribution to human progress.
Today, China is the world's second largest economy, but in many aspects, it's the leading economy in the world. However, I think with the wisdom of the Chinese leadership, they are now shifting the attention or the focus or the emphasis from economic growth to total holistic development, which means they are focusing now on not only on economy, but also on environment, on human development, on health, on education, on a prosperous, using the Chinese terms, and quality life for the people in China, but also for the environment and the ecology of China. Above all, what I believe is very important in this holistic development approach is the profound understanding of the Chinese leadership and the absolute commitment to move China from an industrial manufacturing society to a society of innovation and creativity.
Lingering pandemic, soaring inflation, intensifying food and energy insecurity. How will the G20 Bali Summit lead the world through the uncertainties? With its vibrant economy and ever-growing connectivity, how will Asia promote free trade and globalization? And as China has eliminated absolute poverty and pushes towards modernization, what will it provide to the global economy?
China has long been a responsible global partner. While some Western countries choose to play a zero-sum game in their development, China has instead chosen the path of win-win cooperation. As China promotes and benefits from its high-quality growth, it also hopes to share the fruits of its development with others through economic globalization, multilateralism, free trade, and opening up. And despite the recent voices casting doubt on globalization or even declaring it to be dead, many experts and scholars clearly disagree and say that globalization is still the way forward.
Globalization is not dead. It might not even be dying, but it's going to be changing, and it's changing very fast. The good old days of rampant knocking down of borders, the kind of reaping the low-hanging fruits is over.
In the earlier phase of the current wave of globalization, in the 90s and the early 2000s, the view was that globalization would benefit the North, that it was the United States and Europe that would be the great winners of globalization. Now, what is happening now, I find is most fascinating. It is the United States and many European countries that are retreating from globalization. And they talk about decoupling, and they talk about, and in fact, erect barriers and all sorts of walls to impede free trade and the free movement of goods. And it is countries like China and countries in Africa and in Latin America that say, no, we need free trade. So this is a remarkable turnaround that we have seen. It used to be that the United States was the great champion of free trade. It no longer is. China should persist in its approach of defending free trade, working with the global South, and moving forward on initiatives like BRI, because that is where the future lies.
There could not be more proof of China's commitment to free and open trade. In addition to the Belt and Road Initiative, China has put forward the Global Development Initiative and the Global Security Initiative, promoted multilateral free trade agreements such as the RCEP, and encouraged more trade, investment, and global cooperation through platforms like the China International Import Expo, the only expo of its kind in the world. In fact, the just concluded fifth edition of the CIIE made new records in terms of the number of participating countries, volume of intentional deals, and the launches of new products.
Many in the West want to paint a picture that China is returning to some command economic past. A lot of phrases like a switch to a Marxist-Leninist economy have been put forward. Now, we can argue the level of Marxism and socialism in Chinese economic thinking, some of which is actually why it is successful. some of the more socialist approaches. Poverty alleviation wasn't a pure market forces phenomenon. It was a combination of market and socialist thinking. I think as China moves out of a more restricted COVID world, the world will be surprised at how strong this domestic market is, not just from a point of view of companies coming here to seek opportunities, but what is generated locally, the domestic dynamics of China itself and its economic management. I am very positive about their future.
We know that the world is divided. We are divided global north, global south. We are divided on income. We are divided on religion. We are divided on resources. We are divided in whatever the possible way that we can think of. So in that sense, that I think Chinese objective of a community of shared future is really great for me. And I think you will be able to walk the talk now. I mean, you have stated your objectives, and if you can achieve it, then the world can achieve the hope of a shared future. Now, in that, I think it is like when China is thinking of a community of a shared future, the interdependence comes, the interdependence among people. Mutual benefit among the people will come. Mutual prosperity, mutually rewarding benefits will come.
And the old saying goes, united we stand, divided we fall. China has clearly shown its commitment to pursuing high-quality growth, promoting free trade, and opening up to the outside world. And China has shown it is ready to shoulder the responsibilities with other G20 countries to help address the global economic challenges that we all face together.